So welcome. You can tell us, you can share in the chat where you are attending this webinar from. It's always a pleasure to read that we have attendees from different parts of the world. So welcome to the webinar series, Human Rights and Psychology. Today, we will have the webinar with the title Social Inequalities at the Intersection of Psychology and Human Rights. Our distinguished speaker today is Professor Ramacharan Tripathi from Swaraj Vidyapith from Allahabad in India. The moderator today will be Polly Hagenaars from the Global Network of Psychologists for Human Rights, currently in the Netherlands. And the hosts are Mary Bullock, who is representing at the same time the Global Network of Psychologists for Human Rights and the International Council of Psychologists, currently in the United States of America. And my name is Marlena Plavšić, representing Global Network of Psychologists for Human Rights in Croatia. I will tell you just briefly before we begin with the introduction of Professor Tripathi and his speech, who the hosts are. So this event, the series, is organized by two organizations. It's the Global Network of Psychologists for Human Rights. You can find on our website all kinds of information related to the intersection of psychology and human rights. We are very proud that we have been issuing monthly bulletins for how many years now, Polly? Who knows? Even before we became the global network. So for many years now, we keep very good pace with publishing the bulletin. You can find information about the intersection of psychology and human rights. You can also find there the past webinars because we record them. So you can watch and listen to everything that has been delivered so far. The other organization that is hosting the webinar series is International Council of Psychologists. This is an older organization, much older sister to say. And I would like to draw your attention to an event that is taking place next month, April 23rd, at the United Nations. There is a Psychology Day, and ICP has been has been holding the consultative status in the United Nations since the 80s, and it plays a role in celebrating the Psychology Day that is always held at some time in April. I think it's not always the same date. And this year it will be the 19th annual Psychology Day. I have some basic information for you about the webinar, the technical part of the webinar. You can ask questions or you can comment during the webinar or after the Professor Tripathi's speech, either in the chat box or in the Q&A box. If you attend the webinar for at least 40 minutes, you will receive the certificate of attendance automatically in few days. As I said just before, you will be able to see the recorded version of the webinar. Again, maybe from the next week, it will be available on the Global Network's website. And if you need a closed caption function is available. So this is something that you might need during the webinar. Now I will give floor to Polly, our moderator today, to introduce Professor Tripathi. Polly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marlena. It's a great honor to welcome you, Professor Tripathi. Professor Tripathi is the former director of the G.B. Pent Social Science Institute at Allahabad and served as professor and chair of the Department of Psychology at the university there in Allahabad in India. And over the course of his distinguished career, Professor Tripathi has contributed extensively to higher education and research He has served as a member of the University Grants Commission, the Indian Council of Social Science Research, and the Indian National Commission for Cooperation with UNESCO. He has also held several important leadership positions in the field of psychology as president of the National Academy of Psychology in India, as a regional president of the Indian Academy of Applied Psychology, and in addition, he was Secretary General of the Psychology and National Development section of the International Union of Psychological Science. Professor Tripathi has contributed widely to academic publishing. He has served on the editorial boards of numerous national and international journals, and until recently he was the chief editor of the Journal of Psychology and Developing Societies, published by Sage. He is also the author of many influential books, including among many others, Towards an Integrative Psychological Science and The Deprivation, Its Social and Psychological Roots. His research has focused on areas such as social and cultural values, intergroup relations, organizational influence processes, social change and development, poverty and psychology, and questions of decolonization. And on a personal note, dear Rama, I would like to add that I've learned a great deal from you over the years. I feel deeply grateful for the opportunity to stand, not to have it, on your academic shoulders. Professor Tripathi, it's a pleasure to welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Polly. Thank you, Professor Mary Bullock and Professor Marlena. Let me begin with a Hindu greeting. Namaste to all of you who are here with us today. I consider it a great honor to speak on this particular occasion in this series, which is being organized by the Global Network of Psychologists and by ICP. I think the kind of job which gnphr has been doing over the years, and I was checking with Marlena, and Marlena was checking with Polly and others, how long this has been going on, and there was no clear answer. I know personally that this has been for more than a decade at least. I think it's been going on for 2 decades. The topic I have chosen to speak on today is social inequality at the intersection of psychology and human rights. And that's what Global Network of Psychologists has been doing over all these years. So far as I'm concerned, this presentation flows out of the kind of research which I have been doing over the years here in Allahabad, which focuses on social change and national development. It focuses on deprivation, it focuses on social identity theory, and other kinds of things. I'm associated with Swaraj Vidyapeeth, which believes in Gandhian philosophy of peace and non-violence. And that would explain some of the things I'm going to say today. The reason for this is that if there's one person in India who has worked all his life to remove the curse of social inequality from India, it was no other than Mahatma Gandhi. He's known as a Mahatma or a saint because of the kind of moral stand which he took on a number of issues. And like all of you, I also believe in having societies which are harmonious, which are free of conflict, where humanity is considered not as a ritual or a political slogan, but it's accepted as a social philosophy. What I think all of us believe in is that we don't believe in having hate around us. We believe in having people who enfold each other, who love each other, who relate with each other, who are compassionate and empathetic. Let me begin with something with which all of us you may relate. This is the foundational question of today's presentation that I'm going to make. It arises out of a dialogue which took place between Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was an Indian philosopher who preferred to be called as a speaker, who was dialoguing with an American physicist. Some of you may have heard his name, David Bohm. And while they were talking, Jiddu Krishnamurti turned to David Bohm and asked him this question: has humanity taken a wrong turn? That's a question that all of us have been asking after viewing what has been going on in this world, in the Middle East, between Ukraine and Russia. And sometimes back we have here Marlena, whose country was in turmoil. The answer which Bohm gave probably is a very good one. He asked this question, a wrong turn? Perhaps that happened some time back. Not some time back, a long time back. And the reason for that is very simple. The reason is that there have been conflicts, not only the ones which I was mentioning here, but conflicts which have gone on for the last not many centuries, but for many millennia. But that divide which has led to these kinds of conflicts probably wasn't as deep as it is today. And the reason for that is that the minds which got constructed recently, they're very different compared to the minds which people had in the last millennia. The answer which you find here on the slide, which Krishnamurti gave, I think, would tell you something about that, because he said that the problem is not that the humanity has taken a wrong turn, but it's the kind of minds which we have, which we're constructing, where human beings are constantly trying to become something, to achieve something, to become richer, to become more powerful, to become more successful, is at the root of some of these problems where conflicts happen. Not only conflicts happen, we engage not in enfolding the other person, but in ascribing that particular person or that group of persons a lot of negative attributes. What has happened is that we do not relate with other human beings as friends. We relate with them as enemies. So the foundational question becomes very important, that why is it that we're not able to do that? And that's the kind of question I'm going to begin with. And can I have the next slide, please? The problem that I'm going to address here today has to do with social inequality. And as mentioned here, it has reached unprecedented levels. I say that because of what I and you see happening around us. You see, for example, that a very small fraction of humanity, 1% in the United States, controls the wealth of a very large number of people. And that's not only true of the United States. It's true of most countries. It's true even of a country like India, which today has the largest number of people living on this green planet. There are more poor living in India today than there are rich people. And the reason for this kind of social inequality, again, goes to the kind of minds which we have constructed. Now, this kind of disparity that we see relates not only to wealth, it relates to other kinds of resources. For example, United Nations regularly does a survey of the number of people who are deprived of food, who are deprived of healthcare, and many other similar kinds of resources. And we find that, again, a very small fraction of people control these resources. A very large number of people in this world go hungry. So it's not only economic disparities, but it's also other kinds of problems related to social inequality that we witness on our green planet. We find that there's discrimination related to race. I mentioned the name of Mahatma Gandhi. Throughout his life, he struggled to see that Harijans, who are considered outcasts, are given the due place in the Hindu society. Harijans, if you translate that into English, will be God's people. But the Indian society treats them as untouchables, those who cannot be touched, and if they touch anything, that food cannot be taken, or if they touch you, then you should go take a bath. So there is discrimination based on race. Mary may have seen that in the United States. I participated when I was a student at the University of Michigan, which did not have many black students who were studying there. And there was a black students movement. This was during Martin Luther's time, Martin Luther King's time, that the students came out on the street demonstrating that more black students should be enrolled by the university. I'm glad that that has happened. But the kind of racial divide which was there back then in the 1960s and 1970s, and even before that, hasn't totally disappeared. We find that there's discrimination based on gender. That's something which you can see in the work settings. You can see the discrimination based on religion. There is this term Islamophobia, with which I think most of you would be familiar. For a time I was in the Netherlands, and Polly would know that there are a large number of Muslims who had migrated from Turkey. The kind of treatment which they are getting today is very different. It's not only in Netherlands, it's also in France. It's not only in France, it's also in places like India. In many other places, you'll find that the kind of discrimination which is there based on religion, particularly based on Islam, that is something which I think we have to take into consideration when we're talking about social inequality. There are close to about 120 plus million people who are displaced, who are refugees. They're not living in their own homes. They're living in places which they cannot call homes. They're living in countries which are not their country. These are countries to which they have migrated. So there are these kinds of problems which a very large number of people in the world face. And I think it's in this, keeping this in view, I think a statement can be made that social inequality has reached unprecedented levels. And I think it's for us psychologists to take this into consideration, that how can this situation be corrected? That is what gnphr has been doing. That's what APA has been doing. I'll talk about that a little later. We have the next slide, please. A question may be asked, which I'm asking here. Now, how do we understand social inequality? How do and why do societies create social inequality, and how does it get sustained over a period of time? As I was telling you, there are no policies which would be there which will justify why social inequality is there. Although we saw what happened in South Africa some time back when the white supremacists were there and how the blacks were discriminated against. But it appears that there are various reasons and there are various psychological processes which we have to understand, which feed inequality or the sustenance of inequality. And one reason for that is that they're able to justify that doing what they're doing is very normal, it's legitimate, it's necessary. The norms which govern some of these kinds of thinkings, call them social norms which are injunctive, or they're not only injunctive norms, they're also descriptive norms because they see others engaging in similar kinds of behavior. It's justified on the ground that if we didn't do this, these people will not know what social space they are occupying, what kind of social space they are occupying, which is different from the social space which is occupied by those who are discriminating against them. One of the things which happens, which I would like to point out, is that social inequality results in people who are discriminated against, who are treated as unequal, in losing out on human dignity. They feel oppressed. And they feel oppressed because some of them are taken as slaves. They feel oppressed because they are humiliated for all kinds of things. And if they are humiliated, how will they get back the kind of human dignity which they have? Because when we're talking about human dignity, we're talking about extending certain amount of respect which they deserve as humans. There are various ways in which they are denied human dignity. As I said, that they're taken as slaves. I think the example which I have in mind is not only of people, who migrated from Africa or who were taken as slaves, the black people who were taken as slaves, but even Indians, who migrated to places like Africa and also West Indies. Even these people who were taken there they were told that they were taken as workers, agriculture workers, but then they were denied the kind of freedom which they deserved. And when you're talking about denial of human dignity, we have in mind that if people are denied the kind of freedom which they deserve to express their opinion, to relate with others, whoever they want to, on an equal footing, then there is a problem. So what I'm going to do is to ask some of these questions. That why is it that human societies create social inequality, and once it gets created, how does it get sustained over a period of time? Can I have the next slide, please? The position which I take is that the answer to some of these questions, which are very hard, can be given by psychology. I've been talking about the kind of construction of minds which have happened. But understand that when we're talking about human systems, be they work systems, be they educational systems, be they social systems, be they political systems or legal systems, all of them are constituted by humans. And it's the human mind which takes decisions relating to a very large number of problems which are presented before them or to them. When I'm talking about social inequality, which we find, for example, in case of women, or in case of, let's say, Black people, or in the case of, let's say, people who have migrated from other countries, there are all kinds of processes which are involved. The processes which I mentioned here, for example, refer to processes which create a division between us and them. Us is constituted by people who belong to your own group, and them who belong to these people who have migrated or who are attributed all kinds of negative qualities. And how does that happen? That happens based on formation of identities, social identities. It happens when we compare groups and members of groups which are placed, let's say, in the lower order with groups which are placed in the higher order in society. And then there are all kinds of justifications which are offered. The justification which offered may be of the kind where you say that, well, we came here first, these people came later. In the case of the refugees, that's an argument which is very often given. There are also societies which are old societies like the Indian society. We say that, well, Aryans came here a long time back, and Muslims came here, only after after Islam came into the picture in the 8th century. So there is this process which we call the process which divides between own group and out group people, which I think is responsible for the kind of social inequality that we see. And over a period of time, what happens is that such divisions become permanent, and people start engaging in social inequalities regularly. and start engaging in violation of human rights. This is something that you will see very often taking place in all kinds of countries, in all countries all over the world. Next slide, please. Mary, can I have the next slide, please? I've already said, and I'll say it again, that what I'm going to do in this presentation is to talk about these psychological processes which intersect in various ways with social systems to produce and sustain inequality. As I said before, that these are societies which are basically driven by values which are very different. These values drive competition. These values drive exclusion. They do not encourage empathy. They do not encourage inclusion. What they encourage is exclusion. As a matter of fact, what we need to consider here when we're talking about psychological processes is to consider these two psychological processes, what leads to social inclusion and what leads to social exclusion. Can we move on, please? Since this presentation on the intersection of psychology and human rights, let's begin by asking this question that why psychology matters and how psychology can answer this whole question of social inequality. One of the things which I'd like to point out is that social inequality is not only a political or social or economic problem. Very often, what we do is that we treat it differently. Governments treat it very differently. Governments treat, for example, in India, what they have done is when they have considered the scheduled caste or the case of the caste discrimination, they have tried to correct it with the help of the constitution by providing reparation, by taking recourse to various kinds of affirmative actions. But has that really helped in bridging the divide? It has not. As a matter of fact, the caste divide which existed prior to 1950 when the Indian Constitution was adopted, in my view, it has deepened today. And all this has happened despite the fact that we claim to be more together today than we did yesterday. So in that sense, when we're talking about social inequality, when we're talking about all kinds of inequalities, be they political, be they economic, be they social, I would like to believe that they're more psychological. The divide which we're talking about is more psychological than something which you would find or due to psychological processes than what you would find due to other reasons. And the reason for that is very simple. How else one can understand except say that, well, the divide exists? I mean, something which is very obvious. In case of economic divide or in case of economic social inequality, that can exist only if humans create divisions. If humans did not create divisions, if we did not have the kind of systems which we have today, which are basically hierarchical, we would not have the kind of social inequality that we see today. If we did not organize organizations based on power, based on status, then we will not have the kind of divisions that we see today in these systems. such thinking leads to social exclusion. And unless we do something about doing away with these processes which create social exclusion, human dignity cannot be restored. That would be impossible to restore unless you construct new minds, unless you construct minds which relate. We go to the next slide, please. We've been talking about social inequality. When we talk about social inequality, there is something which I think we need to understand, because it's something which very often is ignored. That yes, it has to do with unequal distribution of resources and opportunities across social groups. But what's more important than this is that what it does, there are studies which show that social inequality affects life chances. And when I'm talking about life chances, I'm talking about that fewer students, I talked about the scheduled castes in India, they go to schools. Fewer women, for example, girl education in India and in many other places, the developing countries, you'll find that fewer girls go to school compared to the boys. So far as health is concerned, again, that's something which you would find that the health facilities which are available in case of different groups of people, they're not the same. There are more health facilities available for men all over the world than they are available for the females. And when I'm talking about health, I'm talking not only about physical health, I'm talking also of mental health. Consider mental health. And that's an area where you would find that such kind of discrimination is there, such kind of inequalities. When it comes to economic resources, again, you find, I have mentioned this before, that the richest 10% in the United States, actually globally, if you consider, you find that they account for 52% of the global income. And the poorest half receives only 8.5%. Now that's a big, big difference that we find between the rich and the poor. And that kind of a divide, economic divide, which you find, which serves as the basis of social inequality, is something which we need to consider very, very seriously. We have the next one. I mentioned this before, that hunger affects millions globally. There's another thing which happens. I think I'm forgetting the number, but there are a very large number of forced evictions that have taken place and displacements which have taken place, which have resulted in people migrating to other countries. There are very large number of people where people get detained without conviction. There are court cases which keep going on in various places, in various countries, not only for days, but for years. And in many countries, they are not even heard. I know of a case where the person was discharged after 20 years in India, and he was declared that he was not guilty. But for 20 years, he remained in jail. Just imagine that how many people, how many families suffer because of this kind of a detention, where no conviction has taken place, but the people who have been alleged to have committed some crime, they have been detained but not convicted. There's limited access to healthcare, I mentioned that, and discrimination is based on caste, race, gender, and identity. This again is something which you find serve as the causes of social inequality, or they serve as the basis of social inequality in various countries. The various explanations, which I think we are all psychologists here, I think all of you probably would be familiar with some of these explanations which social psychology offers. For example, there is a social identity theory, which was put forward by Henri Tajfel, and with some of his students. Taylor was another one from Canada who was who was associated with him. Social identity theory, along with social categorization theory, makes a distinction between who belongs to my group, who does not belong to my group. This in-group and out-group kind of a decision is a divide is taken or is done by the social identity theory. And what's interesting is that that those individuals who belong to in-group, they are favored, and those who are not members of your own group, they suffer from a very different kind of a bias, which is not positive but negative bias. So if we are talking about prejudice, prejudice would be found in the case of outgroups. They would be stereotyped, and all kinds of negative attributes would be assigned to the outgroup people, leading to a kind of a dynamics which is going to be very different, which would not allow in-group and out-group to come together ever. Social identity theory has been used for the kind of intergroup conflicts that we see today. These conflicts can be based, the ones which we are seeing today, can be on economic grounds, for example, between what we see in Ukraine and Russia, or they can be on the ground of ideologies, something that we see in the case of Middle East. How does social inequality sustained, or we find that social inequality maintains its existence in different countries over a period of time? System justification theory says that, well, there are all kinds of reasons, why X group of people should be discriminated against, why we should act in a particular manner. There are all kinds. One can take engage in this kind of a defense based on social norms. One can come up with all kinds of justifications why we exist, why we engage in discrimination. For example, when we, in the case of untouchables in India, for example, the justification which is given is that, well, there is no discrimination. The only thing is that these people, they engage in profession which is unclean. For example, they skin the dead animal, they engage in skinning of the dead animal, they engage in cleaning of the toilets, they engage in all kinds of dirty things, and that's the reason why they are discriminated against and treated as untouchables. Another reason for social inequality is that it's believed that there is a just world, and people are not discriminated against for no reason. There has to be a reason if they're discriminated against. Otherwise, the world would act in a just manner. There are studies which show that, well, social injustice, there are all kinds of social injustices which are there in different cultures. And not only in different cultures, in different contexts. And some of these kinds of injustices cannot be explained on the basis of just false beliefs only. Finally, there is this kind of theory which has been put forward called the social dominance orientation, where you say that there are certain kind of people, who believe in social dominance, and their preference is for having hierarchies in organizations. They don't believe in equality, and this is because they go by power. There's also a social identity theory of power, and based on these kinds of discriminations, based on these kinds of orientations, you find that those who are more powerful, they take recourse to discriminating those who are weak. And hence, what happens as an outcome is that social inequality happens, particularly in case of those people who belong to weak groups or who have no power or who are low on social status. The different reasons why inequality, social inequality, appears legitimate. I talked about justification theory, social justification theory. But one of the reasons is that people justify it on the ground that if you allow people to do what they want to do, if they would like to do what they're programmed to do, then there's not going to be any order. Systems are going to become disorderly. And if you want to have any kind of uncertainty, then you need to put these people in their place. Tell them that you can do this, you cannot do that. And I'm talking about social identity coming in here, because social identity then again does the same kind of a thing, that identities are constructed based on what people can do and cannot do. I talked about Harijans. Harijans can not pray in temples. They are not allowed to enter temples. The reason being that they are unclean. And because they are unclean, they cannot pray in temples, because the god then is going to become dirty. Cultural norms, again, when I'm talking about what I was doing right now in case of virgins, again, that can be taken as a cultural norm. And that again feeds social inequality in different ways. I think if you were to talk about, how slaves are treated in different countries, if you were to talk about how women are treated in different countries, you'll find that the kind of treatment which they get, that is very, very different. I'm sorry I have taken longer than I believe I would be doing, but let me just quickly go over these two other slides which I have. My main argument has been, and it is, that new liberalism, or the values of new liberalism, new liberal orientation, that emphasizes individualism. It emphasizes competition. And because it emphasizes individualism, it emphasizes competition, the way it treats others is very different compared to societies which are not driven by new liberal ideologies. There are studies which show very, very clearly that there is a difference between the way Westerners think and the way Easterners think. Westerners, the cognition in the case of Westerners is driven by binary analytical thinking. This is something which has been shown by Nisbet and many of his students. And in case of Eastern cultures, it's driven more by a logic which is very different. It's holistic logic, or it's not binary dialectics, it's holistic dialectics. Globalization, which has adopted new liberal ideology, promotes these kinds of mindsets, which create the kind of divisions which we see in the societies today. They reinforce these, globalization has reinforced these kinds of things. This kind of binary dialectics is what really is responsible for othering and social inclusion, social exclusion. It does not encourage inclusion. It encourages marginalization. It encourages dehumanization. And the refugee crisis which we see globally is based on this kind of a social exclusion. Can we have the next slide, please? There are these two things which we need to consider. There is a process called social comparison when we're talking about the comparison being made between groups, particularly in where neoliberal kind of ideologies exist. The groups compare and the groups engage in this kind of a comparison and end up with having feelings of relative deprivation and collective narcissism. When we're talking about relative deprivation, we're talking about individuals feeling disadvantaged. And when we're talking about collective narcissism, we're talking about individuals who feel that my group is superior than your group. In both cases, what happens is where people feel disadvantaged or feel victimized, we find that there is a dynamics which develops, which creates and deepens social divisions, and it sustains social inequality. Next one. My view is that if human rights are to be restored, then two things need to be done. We need to intervene at the level of the individual, and we also need to intervene at the macro level, that is at the social change. So we need to transform mindsets, and that can be done with the help of education, which cultivates empathy. I mean, the kind of educational system which will cultivate empathy, will encourage relational thinking, and which will promote the value of human dignity. And instead of people sort of thinking about their disadvantage and hating those who discriminate against them, they would feel more sort of, they will feel that they relate with these other people because they will engage in compassion and they will be more empathetic. Please, I'm mindful of this is the last slide, and I hope that you know this presentation. What I've been talking about is that new liberal ideology creates the kind of styles which engages in competition and binary thinking. It leads to psychological processes which create the kind of divide based on social identities and sustain the kind of divide which exists based on system justification, and engages in othering. Othering results in social inequality, and social inequality makes people to engage in human rights violation. That will explain. Maybe there is some more after this. Is there a slide after this? Yes. All I'm saying here is that policy reforms, like the ones which we have seen in different countries, they cannot eliminate inequality. What psychologists need to do is they need to change the mindsets which produce exclusion. And real change requires that unless those mindsets are there, which transform institutions and the kind of consciousness that we carry, this isn't going to happen. Relational thinking is the only option that we have before us, and all systems, social systems, work systems need to support relational thinking everywhere, and if that happens, we will have societies which are more inclusive. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I've taken more time than I had planned to take.
Thank you so much, Professor Tripathi, for your presentation full of wisdom. And for me, wisdom is science with a heart. And I think these days that's very much necessary, I'm afraid to say.
Thank you, Polly.
I have some questions. How could education, that comes from Maria Rosario d'Alfonso, how could education prevent social inequalities through curriculum focusing on parenting and human relationships or other things?
Well, I think we have to look at our educational systems, what they are doing today. In India, you know, every other day there is an ad which comes out in the newspapers, front page of the newspapers, which says that, well, join my institution. And the reason why you join this institution is that those who got placed got so much money. If education is related only to job and not to character building, then there is a problem. If education is related only to sort of working in organizations, that is important. I'm not denying that that's not important. But if the emphasis is placed on the money which somebody is going to make going through a certain kind of education, then there is a problem. And that's the reason why I'm saying that we need to, we haven't done that. For example, the kind of mental health problems that we find, India is the suicide capital of the world today, is there because all these students are competing against each other. And that, unless, you know, that goes, unless people sort of join institutions because they want to learn, they want to grow, this isn't going to happen. So my view is that I think psychologists can come in and give them the kind of skills which these people need to know. For example, they can all be very, very good. They can learn how to listen. And one of the things which doesn't happen is that people do not know how to listen. They know how to refute. They know how to debate. They know how to compete. They do not know how to collaborate or cooperate.
Thank you. What is the reason that interventions in the field remain so often at the level of the individual?
Say it again, I did not get that.
The reason why interventions in the field remain at the level of the individual, and is that a reason that they are not effective enough?
I'm sorry, I would not agree with that assertion. The intervention that have taken place at the level of the social policy, not at the level of at the individual levels. If these interventions had taken place at the level of the individual, then I think psychologists would be coming in. Psychologists are not able to help people, you know, who are suffering from social inequality. They can help them, of course, in solving the kind of traumas they are suffering from, but that's about all. But social traumas or suffering from social traumas are not going to bridge the kind of divide which exists in society.
Okay, another question from Mary. Well, look, this was a wonderful analysis of inequality. What things can we, as individual psychologists, go to affect change? And do we have recommendations for psychologically based communications, for social psychology interventions or other interventions? Because as psychologists, it's hard to change entire systems, but what can we do to start within our own spheres of influences?
Well, one of the things we will have to do is to assert that we have a role in framing of the social policies. That's the first thing which we need to do, because I think it's only when interventions that we plan to make are at the social level that I think we will be effective at the level of communities. And we want to be effective at the level of the communities, not, you know, in a one-to-one kind of relationships. In one-to-one kind of a relationship, I think we can help, but that doesn't solve the problem. In my view, I think that the micro and the macro, they have to go together. Unless that happens, I think this kind of problem is not going to get solved. We
Thank
have
you.
to become advocates, which happens to be
Absolutely.
one of the things which is gnphr and API say that we have to do. Psychologists have to become advocates of these kinds of social policies.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Because what would you say to a colleague who is saying, I don't like to mix psychology and politics?
Well, I'll ask that person, how does that particular person relate with others in society? If that person relates with others in society, it would be on the basis of power, it would be on the basis of the status, it would be on other kinds of things, which would be there. How do men relate with women, for example, in different societies? Do they relate only on the basis of, that they are humans, or they relate because they're different and they occupy different social spaces? Let's understand that we all will be occupying different social spaces, political spaces, and economic spaces in societies. Relationship is important. And if we start competing, as I've been saying, that the problem lies with competition. The problem lies with getting, let's say, touching the goal faster than anybody else. You want to be the first. And if you want to be the first in line, there is a problem always. You have to learn to walk together. Unless you do it, there is a problem.
Thank you so much. Yes, and there are many, many thank yous in the chat and compliments and so on. Maybe a last question. Is that possible, Marlene, or do we have to wrap up?
Well, I think there are actually not many more questions. I think that people agree and admire what you said, because this is, for those of you who watch our webinar series, you can notice that some of them are very specific, tackling a specific topic. And this one was a beautiful example of a general overarching topic. This is something about the roots of the connection of psychology and human rights. We need to not remind ourselves, but learn how to combine human rights and psychology, because as many of our, I guess, colleagues notice, is that psychology is often viewed, at least in this part of the world, in Europe, in the Americas, as a rather individualistic in its approach. So that's how that also our questions are like, what can I do as an individual? So when you say we are raised to reach a goal no matter what, or with more competition than collaboration, what if our goal were cooperation? That would change maybe the paradigm, how we see things. And we definitely have not been trained to take part in this more social and political frames. So should I take part in creating a policy that affects a large number of people? Many of our colleagues say, no, it's for lawyers, it's for people who are into politics. I'm going to deal with my smaller context in my work. So this is something for all of us to learn, that we can and should, because we know, or we should know, about these things that you reminded us of in social psychology, how things work, how people's minds work. And by introducing it into a larger scale of society, maybe we can then talk about some changes and seeing things in a different perspective. Yeah. thank you very much. Thank you indeed.
Thank you, Marlena.
So thank you also to all of our attendees. I will just repeat that we will provide you with the certificate of attendance, but we will also ask you to fill in an evaluation form, because we learn from your evaluations what we should do further. Thank you to Polly for this wonderful moderating of the webinar. Thank you, Mary, for being a great host and providing all the technical and logistical foundations. And this is the, I will also tell you again that the whole webinar will be available soon, maybe in a week or two, on the website of the Global Network of Psychologists for Human Rights. So you will, if you missed something, there will be a chance for you to see the recorded version. Also, you can see there will be a webinar by Gabriel Velez, Making Meaning of Justice and Peace. So if you are interested, you can also join and attend. There's a QR code, and you can, which will take you to the webinar of the ICP. Also, I will just tell you now the message to the panelists, Professor Tripathi. Now, when we finish, the session will end abruptly. It doesn't mean that somebody is angry with someone else and wants to abruptly end it. That's just how it goes.
Good luck and Polly very much.
Thank you all very much, and let's keep these ideas that we heard today.
All the participants, all the listeners, who joined me today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice day, evening, night, whatever is ahead of you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.